Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. The time is 6:15, and I'd like to call the meeting of the Land and Buildings Committee to order. We have present Mark Haynes and myself. Henry should be here shortly. And tonight we'll be discussing the parking garage, which was brought up by the TIF committee, who I believe the chairman is Pat Woods. So I guess what we'll do is we'll ask Pat to come up to the microphone and identify himself, and we'll hear what you have to say, Pat. And
Thank
Henry
you.
is here now also.
Thank you. Patrick Wood, I'm the chair of the Downtown TIF Advisory Committee. Kevin Dunleavy is here. He's the municipal representative. Bree Henderson is also here. Charlie St. Clair. So three of us are here this evening. Primarily what we're interested in doing is to make sure that the issue continues to be considered, that options considered to be reviewed, and that we don't stop working on moving forward on the parking issue downtown. The memo for this evening that was just handed out to us is very helpful. It shows that there are, if we take the last 2 years, 2017 and 2018, it's about $29,000, almost $30,000. So it's about $15,000 a year that it's costing to do the general maintenance, engineering, and repairs of the parking garage as it currently exists. I know that I have expressed a couple of ideas to some of you on what could be done. I know that there's been some discussion about that. I have no idea where that's gone at this point, but what we would like to do from the TIF committee is to make sure that whatever you need for information that we can get, we'll try to get it for you. We do know that parking is an issue. The lot north of City Hall is full during the week from about 9 or 8:30 on. It's hard to find a space there. The last I looked, there were either 14 or 15 spaces on the second deck of the parking garage, or the first deck, that are not available out of the approximately 119 spaces that are there, 100 spaces that are there. And the second deck is still not available for use. The parking on the street level is private parking, although I'm sure that that's something that is important to the customers in the commercial spaces more than anything else. So we want to do what we can to preserve those, but we would like to hear if there are any ideas that the council has about moving the process forward, if there's things that we can do from the TIF committee, information that we can gather for you to help in the process. The one thing that I did reach out about and try to begin exploring was the possibility of moving City Hall to the current St. Joseph's Church building and that campus. That way, ideally, it would be a means of saving that historic building. We could put the council chambers in that building, and the school could be rehabbed for office space for City Hall. That would take a period of time, obviously, to get that done, but what it would do is it would free up the parking spaces that are currently being used north of City Hall for employees of City Hall, and would buy us more time to deal with the parking garage. It's just a thought. There was somebody that I know of who was interested in perhaps buying this building and converting it to a use that would not be a very heavy parking intensive use. But that was sort of the thought that I had, and I know I've talked to the city manager and Mr. Anderson briefly about that, as well as Father Mark. But I don't know if that is anything that might be of interest, and if so, we could explore that further.
Okay. Does anybody on the Land and Buildings Committee have any questions of Pat?
Do you have any more details that you can share with respect to your conversations with the church?
Any more details? I do not have any more details. I mean, I'm sort of in a position of putting that out there to see if people are even interested in it. And if they are, then we could certainly try to gather those details. But, you know, I'm not going to rock that boat so heavily unless we know that there's somebody interested in getting on board.
You have anything to add, Scott?
Yeah, so Pat did come to see me a while ago about that. I do have an appointment on my calendar for, I believe it's next week, with Father Mark, just to get a better sense of the properties involved, looking at some of the tax maps, looking at the acreage and that type of stuff to it, just in that early stages of gathering some information so that we could start the discussion at the city level to see if there was interest in doing something like that. I was not aware of a potential buyer for this building, but that certainly would, I think, come into play as funding sources would need to be identified if that was a direction that we wanted to go as a city.
Okay. Go ahead, Greg.
Pat, how many parking spaces are over there? Do you have an,
There are approximately 70.
okay.
All right. And that's an approximate
Yeah,
number.
I understand.
But just looking at the Google map, so.
Okay. As far as the parking garage, I mean, I don't remember the year. Well, it should be on here. 2015, Du Bois and King made you're probably aware of this booklet.
I'm aware of it. I'm not sure I've read it, but I'm aware that the report was made.
You know, it's pretty extensive, and they went through the whole garage and identified structures and beams and things like that were failing, or, you know, and we have prices to repair the different parts of it. So, you know, the ramps are, I don't know, what did we spend on the first one? Almost 200?
I think we spent about $115,000 to kind of do some shoring up, and that wasn't necessarily a permanent fix, but it was to certainly make it safe and usable. But at that point, we did not invest additional funds in doing the ramp up to the upper deck.
Right. So it's probably another 120 to do that one, or more now, 150 or whatever, and those would be temporary.
Yeah, we haven't updated those, but I mean, yes, I would say that's at least that number, if not higher.
Yeah. There's you know, this year, like I say, it hasn't been updated since 15, so you have an escalator cost in there, I'm sure. So to do the ramps in the second and third floor was over 1.5 million to repair those. So it's probably closer to 2 now.
Well, it's going to be very expensive.
Yeah.
To make the repairs, just to make it usable for the limited time that the garage really has left to be functioning. And I use the word functioning in a limited sense because it really isn't a very functional garage in many respects. It's too low. The entrance onto that second deck is not high enough for most or many vehicles today, for example, and the turning radii are very narrow, very small. So those are issues that we have. The other problem, of course, is, as we all know, is it leaks, and that creates problems for the commercial space. But then the big issue is, well, can you take the take the top deck off and redo the deck, the second deck, to make it just a roof, so that you can preserve the commercial space? I mean, that's the big question. We can't just tear the whole thing down now because we have all that commercial space that's occupied and paying rent and taxes.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Yeah, it's kind of a no-win situation in a way. Do you invest, to redo the whole thing so it would be there for a long time? I figure, didn't they say it was like a 20-year, 20 to
We had
30-year life?
20 years on the ramps potentially and 30 years on the decks, I think. And I just want to say, so I think the numbers we should be talking about, it was 2.7 for the repairs a couple of years ago, and with some other amenities like the exterior staircase and a couple other things,
Yeah.
put it over 3.1 million. So I think with just a general escalator with inflation, we probably ought to be talking in the area of around probably 3.5, 3.4, 3.5 in today's dollars.
Yeah.
To do that same project.
And that would bring it back to pretty good condition.
Yes.
well, and if
They
we
would-
added.
They would replace all the,
Right.
not timbers, beams and things
And
like
if we
that.
added an elevator, maybe it would be $4 million to do
No, I think
it.
that was included.
Or was that
in
part of that?
I'd
So I
have to
think
go
the-
refresh. I knew we were at least going to put the shaft in there to do an outside elevator in conjunction with a stairwell, and we do have, we did get an easement, an exterior easement, because the city owns no land over there. But when we purchased the privately owned portion of the garage a couple of years ago for $1, we did get easements in order to facilitate being able to put in some kind of an exterior structure that could house an exterior stairwell and/or an elevator shaft.
For some reason, that 4 million's in the back of my mind, and it was including the outside elevator and a glass stairway and all that, and abandoning the ones on the inside.
Yep.
I could be wrong, but for some reason that kind of sticks there.
Yeah.
So it's kind of, do you invest all that money into that structure? And like you say, you can't even get a wrecker up there if a vehicle, breaks down or whatever, because they can't get up there and do anything. I guess you got to push it off.
Well, you can't get a fire truck up there if you needed to.
No,
So, I mean, there
there's limitations to it.
are definitely limitations to it. If the city were to spend $4 million over the next 2 years to do the things that we've just talked about here, that would buy us another 20 years
Right.
approximately. And that would give us the time to really do the planning and the preparation for a new garage or some other similar facility, and maybe even do the other exchange as well. But it would give us that time that we need to make the decision that we need to make.
Yeah. Council Bounds came up with an idea and had a drawing of a parking garage here in the main lot, which, is probably feasible, but I think it can't just be a parking garage. I think you have to have other related things
Right.
to it because of its proximity to the river and,
Right.
and that kind of stuff, so.
I think one thing we did learn is we shouldn't put parking on top of other uses.
Yeah. Well, it's, when they built that over there and then they started hanging the suspended ceilings, they drilled right up through the floor of the garage. So, it's like a sieve. You can't be drilling holes through the part that's supposed to hold the water.
No, it doesn't help.
It doesn't help.
Right.
So, that's what they've been dealing with right along.
Right. But that's just one of the issues with it, of
Yeah,
course.
yeah.
Right.
I don't disagree.
But I think the pushback on Councilor Bound's suggestion was that riverfront location, but I think that there are ways to take advantage of that. Even if you had commercial or residential space on the river side of it and the parking garage on the street side of it, you could still do that. I think we've got a little over 200 parking spaces total on the two decks of the parking garage. And I think if we looked at a parking facility or structure that had about 150 spaces in it, well, it depends. If we move City Hall, the 150 spaces, I think, would probably be sufficient to do it, and last for quite some time. Because we don't know what the future is going to hold as far as transportation, but assuming that it's fairly close to what we've been doing for the last 40 years, 150 spaces might very well be sufficient, because the top deck was very seldom used, as we know.
It's very true. You know, I don't know, maybe we could investigate in removing that top deck and making the second deck you know, not for doing it right away, but at least get some cost estimates of what it would be to do that.
Right, and some engineering information as to how best to do that. If that were done, that would, well, of course, that would make that whole second deck exposed, and then people say, well, we don't want to be out in the open, but they'll park up here and they don't have any problem with it. But it wouldn't be dark, it wouldn't be intimidating, and if we had the outside stairwell and our elevator, that would make it safe again, I think, for people. So it's something to think about.
Okay, so I think it's, you know, the council's got to make a decision on which way they want to go with it. You know, it's kind of dealt a building that's, you know, you hate to kind of sink that kind of money into it, and where you,
Well, unless there's something that we're doing it for.
yeah,
Just putting it in there for the sake of putting it in there doesn't appeal to me. I want to have a plan in place for the future. And if we're doing this as part of a plan to accomplish that end, then it makes more sense, because it's a step in that direction. It's not the direction, but it's the step.
yeah, I agree.
So, I don't know if other members of the committee want to add anything. What's that? Charlie, want to say something?
Add something.
Okay, Mr. St. Clair would like to add something.
All right. Representative Sinclair is always welcome.
I just wanted to say thank you. I just wanted to say that, you know, for me personally, the game changer has been Genesis over here. And I've tried to use the parking garage. Well, I've attempted to use it twice, used it once within the last month. The last 2 times I went up there, I couldn't find a spot. So obviously people are using it now, and it's long-term parking, and I get that. There are several people that have asked about, again, this is just through me, not through a committee or anything, but have asked me about, geez, you know, maybe I'd like to rent one of those storefronts downtown for different businesses. But the very next question they say to me, I'm scared about the parking. And I was going to say something smart, but I won't. So that is a concern for people. And I'm not talking about the demand, Counselor, to park right in front of where you're going to walk into. I'm talking about just in particular. Now, I know on Pleasant Street, when I come down there, a lot of times there's several spaces over there. But, of course, for people who are looking to park all day, that's not really a good spot to do it. So hopefully we're going to continue to need more parking spaces as some of these other empty buildings potentially fill up. But I'm I guess echoing what Pat said, I'm glad that, you know, there's some stuff being looked at here. So
Well, you
that's
know,
all.
we've got the, I don't want to say the solution, but we've got the remedy or path forward with what, you know, Du Bois and King came up with us, and that's remodeling the whole thing.
Sure.
So I guess it's, you know, what direction the council wants to go.
And being selfish like I am, you know, 30 years works for me, great.
It would be for me too.
But after that, yeah. All right, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead.
So just in talking about parking in general, I agree with what Representative St. Clair said. You know, sometimes people think that if I've got to park around the block or walk 2 blocks, that's too far. But people forget how often they go to a mall, in some cases, and walk 3 or 4 blocks to the door. It's all about being able to see the storefront or the door you're going to, really. A couple of years ago, when we expanded the WOW Trail along down by Pittman's Freight Room on that corridor, and we lost some of the on-street parking, we made a negotiation with Craig Bean, who owns the building where the Salvation Army is, and that gate is not locked now, and those spaces are available 24 hours a day as full-day parking for anybody, weekend parking. They're hardly ever used by anybody who's parking. So we've got about 15 spaces there that could be used for full-day parking, and yes, it might be 2 blocks or 3 blocks for someone to to walk downtown, to the center of downtown, but they are available. The other thing we were looking for some feedback on as a conversation before we put too much time into it is there a desire to look at changing the parking on Beacon East and Beacon West? Right now, coming along from the entrance to the garage, you go to 2 lanes, and a lot of times that turns into quite the racetrack with cars going at significant speeds to get from that point to the stoplight at the post office. If we were to talk about, instead of doing parallel parking, remove one of the lanes and do angled parking and make the traveled way just 1 lane, it would probably accomplish 2 things. You could gain additional parking spaces by doing the angled in as opposed to the parallel, and you could slow traffic down a little bit, and I don't think we'd be in for any bottlenecks. You would go as far as Canal Street or a little bit before that, and then you would be able to get back down to the 2 lanes. Potentially, you could do the same thing after you come through Veterans Square around the bend by the Bank of New Hampshire before, or right after the entrance into Hector's. You've got parallel parking there, but again, you have 2 lanes of traffic that sometime come around that curve. There's a crosswalk as you come around to the Water Street, Beacon West area, which now is very wide, and we're talking about doing potentially a bump out like we did in front of Vista to make the travel distance safer for pedestrians. But again, if you were to take away one of those lanes and make it 1 lane of traffic, I think you accomplish more parking, traffic calming, and maybe a little bit safer pedestrian as we look at that crosswalk going next. So we haven't spent a whole lot of time on it. I'm not an engineer, but there doesn't seem to be a lot of heavy lifting or heavy investment for some significant increase in parking without doing a major investment. And it could always revert back if it didn't work at some point. We could always go back to 2 lanes and do the parallel parking again. But so we do have the lot on New Salem Street that is available for anybody, and we could look at those if that's the desire of this committee and or the council to explore what we would gain and how we would approach it.
Okay. That's a good idea. I think that was brought up once before, but it kind of got forgotten about on that angle in parking. Yeah. Anything else to add, Pat?
What the city managers just pointed out is the speed with which traffic flows on Beacon Street East and West, and that is an issue.
Yeah.
Especially in that Beacon Street West area where that, the Water Street connection there, that's a place where we have a pedestrian walkway, and there are people racing around that 2 lanes of traffic, and it's hard for them to slow down enough to not hit somebody. I'm amazed we haven't had a few more accidents there than we have. So that's an interesting idea, the angled parking there, and also over here.
Yeah.
I mean, that buys us time, and that is part of what we're talking about. Let's find solutions that move us forward in the process. So.
Okay. Very good. Anybody have any other questions for Pat? Okay, thanks, Pat. I was wondering if, Wes, could you come up to the mic for a minute, please? I'm not going to blindside you.
Okay.
I was just wondering, when they do when we do the yearly maintenance and
Right.
inspections and things like that, are they going back and looking at the beams that are pictured in?
What we do is we look at what the past trend is on what we've inspected before. We check to see how worse it's going to get, and then we do a general inspection of the rest of the area to see how much corrosion it's cutting. So most of the focus is already on what we've already done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the beams that are pictured, are those revisited and checked?
Yeah,
out?
every year we revisit the whole thing.
Okay, so is the ceiling still leaking into the businesses?
Correct.
They are, okay. Okay. Any remedy for that, other than the deck?
Really isn't an easy one, because the deck is the
Ceiling.
roof for the building underneath it. If you take the whole deck apart and rebuild it, you're gonna get closer. Most of the new ones, you have a separate, building has its own roof, and then you put the deck on top of it. So you got that second really true, non-traffic layer for the waterproofing of the building underneath it.
Okay.
And the other thing with water is water travels quite a distance sometimes on this, so just because you have a leak coming in one spot of your ceiling, doesn't mean it's coming in through the deck right above. It could be 10, 15 feet away and running along a pipe, running along a beam, you know, following some other course to get where it finally turns into a leak through the ceiling. So it's not as easy as just looking up and saying, oh, there it is.
Right.
We kind of chase these things for years.
I wonder if it would be worthwhile having Du Bois and King reevaluate replacing that deck on the first level, or the second level, the first parking level. Seeing what that would cost to do that. I mean,
Update
even
the
if we
numbers, I
don't
mean,
use the top, you know, update the price on that decking for that first level.
Just from an engineering aspect, if we take off the third deck, the second deck now becomes the roof. That means you really got to figure out how you're waterproofing it to protect the building underneath it, whereas you're getting some automatic waterproofing.
Well, I'm saying
having
right,
the-
for right now, leaving this, the top deck there.
Right.
And repairing the deck on, you know, the deck over the businesses. Seeing what that would cost to do that.
So you're just looking to update the work that was done a couple years ago and just update those numbers and any additional
Yeah,
work that may need to be done on top of that?
yeah,
Because everything we've done so far has just been
light maintenance.
temporary, short-term repairs to
Right.
keep it functional. We have not done anything in significance, structural replacement type of thing. It's been to keep it open
Yeah,
to the extent it is.
you know, maybe if, you know, if we ask them to do A, how much that price is, B, what that price would be, you know,
Okay.
depending on the extent council would like to go, so. So maybe if that could be gathered, doesn't have to be for the next meeting or a couple meetings from now.
I think we have that pretty much broken down because we talked about doing one, both, the
Exactly.
phasing in, because we'd have to do one in order to,
Right.
you know, then go up and stuff. So I think that would be,
So I guess basically it's like what the escalator would
Yep.
be for that cost of doing that, you know, materials or whatever. So, okay, I appreciate that, Wes.
Okay.
Anything else that the committee would like to bring up? No? Okay.
just a sense of the angled parking. Is that something you want us to spend a little bit of
Yeah, I
staff
think that'd
time
be
in
very
identifying?
worthwhile going forward. Maybe we could do that in-house. I mean, I don't think we need to hire an engineer to,
No, we can just do a simple layout of, you know,
Yeah.
the linear feet between the intersections, estimate how close you would get, those types of things for safety, and we could identify the number of spaces we could gain in each segment, just to give us some talking points going
yeah.
forward.
I don't know if any of those traffic studies we did in the past, which was several, I don't know if any of them brought that up and had it actually laid out. I remember there was a few things that were laid out when they wanted to change all the directions and,
There might be bits and pieces. We were a little bit leery about bringing out that whole study for
get
getting
that
them
right.
talking about two-way traffic and changing Veteran Square and going down a path
Yeah,
that
we
we're
don't wanna
not,
do that.
that we're not recommending. So we want to bring you something clean that focuses just on those
Okay.
particular sections.
yeah, if you could do that,
So we-
that's a matter of putting painted lines down, basically. So,
And maybe,
Yeah.
you know, bump, anyway, yes.
yeah, okay. Yeah, that would be great if you could do that.
Okay.
Well, and I'll bring that comment up to the council later on
All right.
during the meeting. All right, if there's, go ahead.
Scott, you are gonna float the idea with St. Joseph's?
I've got a meeting next week, yes,
No, I think there's,
to at least get information about
I
it.
mean, I don't wanna see a lot of money spent on studies and things, but I've, you know, just generally look at the idea and conceptually if it's feasible.
Sure.
I think I think it's doable. Okay.
Also, Scott, do we, with the financing, do we have room for, if we had to bond something over there, say 2 million, or do we have room in our finances, do you think?
Everything would be about priority, so I think in the TIF, depending on what we've committed for the existing projects and funding some money towards the Colonial when we close on that, and then also was the direction of the council to do some accelerated payback to the general fund beyond what the TIF was contributing. So I would say at this point, there would not be any TIF dollars to fund, in essence, a $3 million bond for 20 years. I mean, you'd be
Correct.
talking at about,
I'm talking through the general budget, you know,
yeah,
tight.
we'd have to look. I mean, we did a couple of 2.5 million, and again, the full impact of the second 2.5 million general street bond has not hit. So if you recall, in this year's budget, we're only paid for the partial year's interest this year only, so it's probably around $35,000 or $40,000 if I looked it up. Next year on that 10-year bond, we're probably looking to have to bump up that number by another $220,000 to cover the full principal and interest debt service on it. We're also targeting to do an additional $1 million bond, but we proposed paying for that out of the $5 registration fee account for the motor vehicles, which we've kept separate, and we think for the couple of years we've built that money up. And what the bond will be, that'll be self-supported and not impacted through new dollars, so to speak. It'll be through existing dollars. So
The interest and payments on the two bonds that we did was going to come out of the line item for road repairs, correct?
we had said we could if we didn't, but I mean, as you know, we are
'Cause that was the
we are
intent
not
of-
in one. It could be the intent, but the intent was also if we leave more in the roads budget, it certainly is needed for other general projects around the city. So if we were to fund the debt service out of the roads budget, we could, but that means now you're probably down in the area of $900,000, $800,000 a year for general street repairs, where right now we've been up about $1.5 million. And based on the condition of the roads in New England winters, I don't think anybody would be saying their first choice is to make a significant cut to the street. So if there's a way to fund the bonds and still keep general street monies at a more appropriate level, we know from our pavement presentation, we should be putting more than the 1.5 million at streets right now. We should be doing 1.8 and then 2 million in coming years. So those are the things that I'll be weighing into it, and certainly can present options for the council. I mean, ultimately, it's a council
Yeah.
decision, but
You know, that $10 million should have done significant things around town, you know.
5 million, $2.5 million bonds.
Yeah, but when you add in the regular 1.6, you know, you're up close to 10 when you add the 2 years.
Over a couple of
in.
years. And we've done some significant street projects. I mean,
Yeah.
we've got some of the, definitely the Court Street, the Union Ave projects, 3 turning lanes, sidewalks on both sides, the utilities underneath. I mean, there's significant projects in
Yeah, they
terms of what they encompass.
Okay, very good. Anything else from the committee? All right, then, if nothing, I'll close the meeting at 6:48. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay,